Here comes my second one. Insert here is disturbing the youth. Penny dreadfuls, horror, video games, D&D, and the printing press. Trigger warning, society never changes and history is a circle. Here comes state and church sanctioned violence, crime, psychology, and another shallow dive into a topic that occurred to me and then I thought about it. The current pop culture that has not yet become consumable, controlled by current dominant powers, and is therefore corrupting the youth. It's never true the way they say, and it always gets proved pretty quickly afterwards, after a huge media blitz of them saying that this enter here is going to corrupt the youth. Oh my god, the youth. They can't differentiate between reality and fiction. And the streets will be covered in blood, or whatever that they like to say. If it can't be controlled, then censored is the next best thing. Deemed a public safety issue damaging the most unprotected social class. From the printing press removing the church's control on the written word, to Penny Dreadful removing publishing power from the bourgeoisie, a horror being a genre that breaks social norms and examines its flaws, and video games making kids violent. Free thought and unregulated art is named by the dominant socioeconomic as the enemy, and frankly, they're right, but not the way they mean. It imagines a world that can either highlight a truth or create better worlds in a way that will always inspire humanity and propel it forward. It really does shine a mirror on the worst and best parts, and they don't want either of those things happen. And it shows by how hard they try to censor and remove it from anyone learning, hearing, or even thinking about it. So let's start, probably not from the beginning, but we'll start from the middle. The invention of the printing press and the written word set free. In the mid-15th century, the movable printing press was invented by Johannes Gutenberg, was the opening for the age of literacy and the written word being spread to the masses. Before, the clergy would have to handwrite and then orally pass on the text, thereby limiting public access. People would have to wait for Sunday Mass or whatever, however many days they had, and that would be their only entrance into the written word, and it would be transcribed from Latin. So you're not seeing it written down, you're following along only as an oral history before this time, because the printing press ended up making it was movable, so it ended up making it much easier to print a lot of things really fast and was not very complicated to use. So once people figured out how to make it and Johannes Gutenberg passed it on, it was done. That was the big like technological advance that kind of set Europe on fire. Europe, at that point, Europe had been still handwriting manuscripts, and China had like wood blocking. A lot of other locations also did wood blocking, since like China did that from like the 7th century, following either of these two styles of written words for centuries at that point. But once the invention began to spread, the general populace was able to write the Bible and other documents in the common vernacular of the time. So it wouldn't just be in Latin, it would be in the things that they speak and everyone could understand. And once people could start to read their own Bibles, they began to question things in it and reform it where possible. Religions began to divide and create new branched off sections in the Age of Reformation. So, one device and a whole lot of new secular religions. Soon enough, religious identity became tied to politics, and loyalty followed it. Decades of warfare to defend these ideologies that, in a lot of ways, still continue today in their various forms. Some of it through arms, obviously, and a lot of it through legislature that cripples every free thought that they can get their hands on passed through. I'm sure we all have seen that and are fighting it. The printing press was not a weapon of violence, but instead a tool that accelerated the tensions and disagreements that occur between people naturally. Like, people disagree about shit all the time and just don't say it, but being able to have the written word kind of cements what you were gonna say, and it's proof, which is why, keeping a record of things is so important. From that, the church's grip was loosened, and not only were Bibles being printed, but oral histories and literary works were translated across Europe. Printing was both functional, and the rise of fictional media was going to become a financial success from this, now that people could write their own stories. and it was no longer having to be oral traditions that had to be passed on at a single time. You could just print multiple books. That era had quite a few detractors for this technology, and the advancements of those they considered plebeian. A lot of the stuff that was getting printed was rife with spelling errors and stuff like that. Let me see. I think, because there's this for the printing press. Oh, skip that. And a lot of people who had, when it had started to really pop off, a lot of the upper bourgeoisie, who at that point were like inscribers, because they were the ones who were learning, had the free time to learn Latin, and also the free time to write everything by hand and like gilded press that shit. They were pissed because poor people could now write and read and were writing their own stories and their own versions of things. And they really, really hate, even if it was like, a couple spelling errors at the beginning, people were learning and questioning things. And the dominant superpowers never like that. So there was a lot of pushback on his whole thing, not because they didn't think it was worth it, but because they were worried too many people were being able to spread their ideas. But it basically was already fully impossible to contain, because we had people like, dropping like the 99 Thesis and stuff like that, stapling that shit to the walls, and then inventing words that had never been put to pen before, because at this point it had been only, the only people who had access were people who had time and money. And again, this is, God, so long ago. But I want to say that this would be the opening salvo for, because before this it was all oral histories in the European area. I mean, China and them all had wooden block printing, but like, this is where we got to have publishing in the hands of poor people. And they tried to shut these moving printing presses and publishing things down over the years, but every time they were too easy to move, and their security force, whatever it existed at that time, wasn't fast enough to go and catch them, and shut it down fast enough, and they could just move and start again. So we already see the censorship trying to be put in place by just the destruction of the machines. And thus, we press play on the opening chapter of a pattern of pushback from those in the dominant class in order to control narratives and gain capital in its many forms, either to further political agenda, get money, or control people's widening acceptance on different beliefs. You see something written down, you might be more willing to understand it and think about it. Literature is crazy like that. And I think now we pass forward by quite a number of years, and we go to Penny Dreadfuls. Blah, blah, blah. There we go. Penny Dreadfuls, Juvenile Crime in the Late Victorian Moral Panic. That one's going to be important. So we see in the 1830s, 1840s, right here, Penny Dreadfuls, true crime in those goddamn impressionable kids. The face of horror from the past begins to take form in the 1840s in Britain with the Penny Dreadful series. North America had their own version in the 1840s called the City Mysteries, which were more true crime, the contents of which were often sensationalized crime stories or supernatural fiction with the intent to bring quick production and creation to sell copies. Titles recognizable such as Sweeney Todd, Dick Turpin, and The Mysteries of London were some of the stories that arose in this era, many focusing on the true crime, evil aristocrats, and Gothic literature. But as these series swept the streets, the reactions from the upper echelon and owning class were predictably negative. Sentiments of the disturbing youth and the attempts to criminalize followed. In 1895, we saw Publishers Circular. It was in support of such criminalization, but unsure of its ability to even maintain a law, since they had already failed multiple times trying to destroy printing presses. Let's see. Here you go. The Publishers Circular fully supported, but there's no way to enforce that law. At this point, they were starting to connect all juvenile crimes with these books. It says, we do not see how the reading of these people is to be supervised by the police. What form we fancy must be left to best of all detectives, public opinion. And often, of course, the public opinion was divided. There's people who were against it, banning and criminalizing it. And then people who were like giving examples in the newspaper magazines that yes, all these boys were reading it and they were becoming highway robbers. And then there was some people who were like, oh, disturbed youth are reading this and then getting ideas. And here's some other ones. 14 who committed suicide by his mother, living in the court of Holborn. Said because he was a great reader and because he had the book on him. That was the reason why he came up with the idea. But the verdict of a suicide while unsound mind was returned. So was it really the Penny Dreadful that gave him the idea, or was he already very depressed and then he just did that anyways? Because it's never the fiction that you read that does it. It's you're already in a bad place and it may exasperate it, but it doesn't outright cause it to be, oh my God, this is the thing that sets me ablaze. And a lot of these magazines and newspaper were blaming the crude, untutored, ignorant, working class youths who would choose to model their behavior on swaggering highwaymen and petty, dreadful heroes. And these media in this time was magazines and newspaper, and they rallied together to try to change public opinion, even though everybody at this point were already reading these books. Because if there was a sensationalized novel, you can guarantee in the era of TV shows, movies, and a lot of other things that everyone was reading it, considering they had not really left the era or belief of watching people get hung in the streets at this point. Modern media also rallies, and we've seen it again and again, where they rally in support of whoever owns them against whatever pop culture or whatever group that's currently being targeted. And a lot of times they will utilize children and teens to further their own agendas. At this point, they were saying teen suicides and highway robbery were because they were reading such trashy literature, and it was the mark of a deeply unsound mind. And this was said by the Dundee Courier on June 17th, 1896. June 17th, 1896. And we see this as, like, what is this? It's a vampire story. Like, actually crazy behavior. But they also knew that there's just no way they were going to be able to criminalize this. It was already well too far in the public opinion. And also everybody, again, is always participating in these things. You're not getting, like, they all knew what penny dreadfuls were and could reference them. So they couldn't even criminalize it because they would lose their own literature. But they were still blaming everything on the graphic and immoral conduct of these mythology and classics. I mean, who on earth is seeing Sweeney Todd and then being like, yeah, that's the thing I'm going to do? But they're also afraid because the enemies in a lot of these books were the way the horror always works. They targeted the people who were causing problems at all times, which, again, if you recall in Sweeney Todd, the enemy that he had was a corrupt judge. And then his murder victims were the more upper class London natives because they could afford the haircut. Like, you're not going to a specialty barber when you're that poor. So his victims were the the quote unquote middle and upper class of this era, which is probably one of the main reasons why they hated that shit. And then we see that if we look at the era that this is the Victorian age, and if you know anything about the Victorians, they were a deeply patriotic and deep into moral hypocrisy that was very, very wild, considering amongst the many crimes and things that they did with, like, all the other shit. God, get the shit out of here. Why were Victorians so obsessed with mummies? And what were here, let's scroll down. They were turning them into paint. And if they weren't turning them into paint, they were sold as a party-favored drug, essentially. They called it mumia, which could be consumed as a powder mixed with hot water and made into a tea. It could be also mixed with water and applied to skin. So if you're wondering where all the mummies went, the Victorians either ate them or turned them into paint. So there's that. What the fuck? I mean, genuinely, the moral hypocrisy, again, and that's where you see why everyone was like, the literature was so gothic horror-y, because the enemies were, you know, the moral, the grandstanding censorship, the moral high ground over literally anything else. And we see they were also very anti-homophobia. They were very homophobic. Sorry. They were very homophobic, anti-sex workers, despite encouraging men to use sex work, at the same time saying everyone should stay celibate. And at the same time against child labor and animal cruelty, but not against eating mummies and other cruel and inhumane acts to other races. In fact, all this brand of nonsense mirrors the current moral panic people have. Actually, what the fuck? I hate when history rhymes. Except now these psychopaths are pro-slavery, child labor, and anti-queer at the same time. Truly, pick a fucking lane. You guys are such fucking weirdos. And pro-censorship. Like, we're just right back at the moral panic. Like, there's a bunch of people who are normal, and then there's a small but incredibly loud subset of people who are absolutely off their fucking rockers and need to go to therapy. Again and again, bitches, society cannot have original experiences. The true crime documentary that is goddamn history. And many articles in the established and upper echelon owned these newspapers were rallying against the pop culture horror book genre. I mean, that is exactly what they were doing. The strict moral Victorian standards also encouraged the more wild literature as art, and especially horror and fantasy reflected those fears. Petty dreadfuls were gruesome murders to the upper class that likely instilled their hostile response. It was also at this time the Industrial Revolution, which caused a lot of people to lose their jobs really, really fast, to a thing that was both taking all their jobs, they were being set onto the street, and the jobs you could get with the machines were incredibly dangerous and actually operated at a frequency that caused people to hallucinate ghosts, because it was like the same RPM that like is like for natural disasters. And then you had an increased smog, and the water got even more unsafe, which is considering how gross London's water was already causing problem. Poor people were reading literature that mirrored their struggles with a touch more drama and revenge in the form of murder and robbery. Highwayman is not murdering and robbing a poor person. They have nothing to steal. They're robbing the people in carriages and cars because they have money. And you know they did not like that. But the crimes committed are almost always more related to economic disparity and people's desperation than the penny novel they picked up to pass the time. We see that horror always reflects people's actual fears. And now, rock skip. We see the quick replays of this in the 1980s. The first role-playing game of its time. Let me see. I have everything here. Boom! Dungeons and Dragons. We see this. It came out in the 1970s. 1980? Yeah, 1970s. And what happened is a decade later, this is like the first set, but another set later, a bunch of media and newspapers and churches started getting lambasting it, such as religious organizations such as BAD and various others, that the game was an occult tool that opens up young people to influence or possession by demons, as said by John Quigley of the Lakeview Full Gospel Fellowship. Let's see. Boom. So the 1980s Dungeons and Dragons panic. So people, like, again, we had young men committing suicide, and then their mothers were like, sure, they were depressed. They didn't like how their life was going. But it's that damn Dungeons and Dragons. They say if you die in the game, you have to die in real life. Many suicidal young men were said to have done it due to the game, despite having histories of drug abuse, depression, and other common psychological problems that were not being treated. If that doesn't sound familiar. Once again, fictional media was being categorized as corrupting the youth and was going to fill the streets with blood or whatever. I don't. But as always with these pro-censorship fascist ideals, the violence never materializes, and they turn to whatever they don't understand as the next blame. And, you know, I mean, what are we even... It's a role-playing game. We had, this guy, he disappeared, and they couldn't find him, and it turns out he was having a depression and drug addiction spell, and he had gone into hiding in the utility tunnels during an episode of self-harm. And this is, they even made movies commenting on this thing. And then he died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound in the 1980s. And a bunch of activists, don't know that I believe that activist is maybe the word exactly, believe that it was caused by D&D. Like, we had mothers saying, oh my god, despite all the other things that definitely were happening, they were saying that it was caused by D&D. Again, it was pretty obvious that something was wrong with him beforehand, but still, no, it had to be the role-playing game where you have to roll dice. Like, what is this? This mother who had lost her son called it a game which uses demonology, witchcraft, voodoo, murder, R-word, blasphemy, suicide, assassination, insanity, sex perversion, homosexuality, prostitution, satanic type rituals, gambling, barbarism, cannibalism. Like, truly, she must have just been, like, looking up shit in a goddamn dictionary. And you see that they went and they did an intense media campaign through conservative Christian outlets and mainstream media with an appearance on 60 Minutes to oppose the creator of Gary Gygax. I mean, if D&D actually really had all this in the way that they were saying with actual magic, D&D would have been crazy and I would have been playing it long ago. Absolutely nuts. I mean, what do you even do with that? And then obviously the same thing that always happens is people meme it and they make fun of them because that's just what we're always going to do because it's absolute fucking nonsense. As a part of this, any media deemed too corrupting and influence is banned or tried to censor. Over the years, I've heard friends and people in college and everything be like, SpongeBob, magic books, anime, anything that a parent just literally doesn't look into, their religious psychosis will be like, no, it's going to drive them to madness. But not the books that they are given by the church that mentions all of these topics and frames it as a good thing. No doubt the anti-SJW, anti-woke is also part of this pipeline of removing anything with alternative views that must be censored. So you never experience enough to question things, because that's always the rub, isn't it? The wider your experience is and the more you're open and curious to the world, the more you're willing to change. And now, we're here, the modern day one for pop culture. Video games make kids violent. Or do they? The video games are violent and gore, and the kids are going to reenact what they play now that they have a full simulator. Fears about the video games being more rehearsal than entertainment were rife within the 2010 era as video games started to get a higher resolution. Weird coincidence, because before we had the arcade games like Pong and Pac-Man, and those fears weren't anywhere near as high. Whereas in the 2010s, it really did begin to pop off. And if I was a guessing person, and I'm not, boom. So we see it starts to pop off, but I'm gonna bet it's because one, all those videotape things of Where Are Your Children finally started to take hold in some of these parents that had been ignoring their children for years. Also, the games started to get more expensive, and probably the biggest reason why is before, I mean, this is incredibly violent and gory, But this is not where they were really hardcore going at the anti-video game thing, is because the graphics were really low. But the 2010s, we had a really, really high graphic fidelity go up. And now they could see what people were actually playing. I wonder if that's any coincidence there. Now that they could actually see the screen. I also have a theory that people need glasses and they don't realize it because they can't afford them. But now they could actually see the video games. And despite a lot of these games not being violent, they get brushed, of course, because you have Call of Duty and stuff like that, but they get brushed as these super incredibly violent. Wii Party, what? That's not super violent. That's, I don't know what that is, but probably not. Portal 2 is, you're still just robots, and it's a puzzle game. And yeah, I'm definitely assuming it was the graphic fidelity went way up so they could finally see what was on the screen. For before, they were just looking at whatever this is, and with their blurry ass vision and the tiny ass screens and the CRT, they just weren't registering it. Boom, let's get rid of that. Get rid of that. Let's get back to that. With the 2010 starting off a golden era of video games such as the Assassin's Creed Brotherhood, Red Dead Redemption, Mass Effect 2, God of War, Ghost of Sparta, Civilization 5, and Super Mario Galaxy 2. The games could be seeable now. And also they were very expensive because you had to get another console system. So for the first time in quite a while, I think parents were paying just a touch more attention and thus actually saw what their kids were playing. Just the opening salvo to some of the best video games to come in the next decade. But with it, the moral panic of these games encouraging youth to commit violence despite TV and movies having identical, if not worse, violence than most video games. These topics dominated media for several years until, again, nothing came to the statistical proof of the claims from media or any religious organization about how it's causing violent urges to form. While I doubt the violent impulses in this era or any other being anything less than a reflection of the current era and fear and anger of the gambling, microtransactions, and gotcha of it all are probably more troubling to me if I'm thinking about modern gaming. And they also never comment on the demographic that commits these crimes that they're worried about. Because if you look at it, there's a statistic that starts to become very obvious if you play the Clue game with everyone's faces on who commits mass murder. And it's a little obvious, and probably they should look into what that's causing and not so much the video games, because I don't believe it's the video games. It might be desensitizing people to the violence they're experiencing in the world now, but it's definitely not the cause. But I will say the gambling, microtransactions, and gotcha are of modern gaming over the last couple of years are actively making games worse. And then they charge you the inconvenience and removal fees. Actually, maybe they are reflecting the modern world and shitification. Don't love reality and video games both being pay to win, but the notoriously strong spines when it comes to entertainment. I'll never understand. And then we see a rise in conservatism that in many ways are repeats of the moral panics that happen every few decades. And then they're immediate targets of video games. You can look at legislature even now. They just passed that one that would remove all harmful to children things. And what do they consider harmful to children? Obviously the blood and the gore, but also LGBTQAI content. Ooh, what a surprise that they consider the things that they already didn't like harmful to children. And you see the canary in the coal mine, everyone trying to warn you, hey, your privacy being stripped is going to be a bad idea. And the only time you see them pull back on it is when they can get some money in the game. Every time a popular form of entertainment is targeted by these groups to be their new scapegoat to blame all the world's problems on, sometimes they choose sex workers, reproductive health, hysterical women, women, woke people, black people, brown people, trans people, Muslim people, Jewish people, LGBTQIA, if you have blue hair, if you have purple hair, if you have a nose ring, if you're a liberal, if you're a leftist, if you're a communist and anarchist, poor people, people who read horror, people who play D&D, role players, people who play video games, people who read. I guess if you're not part of any of those groups, then you're the only one that sees that these things are disturbing the youth. Anyone else they decide is in the current era of bigotry is that they're currently enforcing against, and media will always be the blame when any of the popular media will always be the blame when any of them take even the tiniest step outside that very obvious color-toned margin. Absolutely buck wild that we have to do this all the time with these pro-censorship weirdos. But I'm hoping with the historical evidence and the repetition of themes, you'll now catch when someone wants to control what you watch and read or play. It's a pretty obvious pattern. Insert here whatever popular media is disturbing the youth. Final thoughts. Initially starting as a much shorter video, now covers a little bit more range because as I was thinking about it, I realized how many things were causing this, and the fiction has the effect on the disaffected, and the disaffected are the ones generally making the media that actually everyone wants to watch until it gets co-opted by the capitalism and then it becomes a consumable. And I saw a lot of complaints about video games diminish when major companies, the military, and investors can get it a piece. Still crazy that the American military has an entertainment division. That's not good. That's not good. And now that you're seeing they're not making as much money and benefits off of it and it's diminishing and average people can make games, I bet we're going to see a little bit of spin away. I foresee banning of all LGBTQIA content, positive representation of black and brown people, more emphasis on sameness, the LLM, the generative AI, which they're going to then alter so that it matches what. And if they can't get white supremacy front and center, they will censor all the other games with these old, tired arguments. Around and around we spin, I suppose. But yeah, I'm betting now that they're not making as much money. The money printing machine is starting to diminish. We're going to see a lot more of this and people who are normal and freer and don't have to rely on a big company to make their own little indie game. We're going to start seeing a lot of pushback. So prepared for that. So fun. Anyways, yeah, we got that printing press. And then we get that. People just want to be having a good ass time. Garbage nonsense. But I wanted it because, you can see, August, 2010s and 2011s is where they really went on it. Youth violence remains a significant public health issue. Violent video games and aggressive behavior, as though they weren't aggressive before they started playing the game. I definitely think the addiction stuff is probably a lot worse because the shortening attention spans and the consumable nature of modern society is probably gonna bite everyone real quick. Everything's getting a lot faster. Trends, games, content, what you're consuming, videos, and it's all getting worse and worse. Although I will say this, I was looking at this and I was going to do a way more extended version. And I was going to talk about all the fact that horror, I'll do another video probably, that horror is always through the eras. Whatever the fear is, the atomic age, that's how we got all these movies. And each decade gets their own this is the thing that you should fear. So we look at 1980s consumerism, medium saturation, the rise of serial killer, 90s identity exam, end of innocence, 2000s surveillance, yikes, I bet that one's going to come back. Virtual horror, almost like the video game thing and the TV thing and the media thing was causing problems. And then you had Godzilla, who was obviously he was an atomic reference to the nuclear bombs dropped on Japan. That was fucked up. But yeah, man, look at that. always the zombies, and then also there's like the cultural horror stuff. I should stop. Because I think I could go for ages. There's people who like horror more than me. I'm a flashlight into the ocean kind of guy. I know just enough to engage people in long conversations and in their special interests, and then I just dip right back out. If it's not exactly where that flashlight I have is, then I don't know. I'm just gonna give you a full blank look. But I have a lot of flashlight lights. I mean, I'm there with the batteries. Uh, but that is what I have to say. I'm gonna do more of these, and they're not gonna have coherent themes. I just have a thought, and then I follow that trail of thought, and then I look up a bunch of sources. And at the end of it, maybe I'll make some fun ones. I have fake conspiracy theories that I think would be fun to say. They have very little basis in reality, but they're compelling, and because I hopefully am the one who invented them, not a weird anti-Semitic or anti-Indigenous or anti-Black fucking goddamn conspiracy, because I'm tired of all these funny ones all being just based in racism. It is such a bummer. Let's go back after, what was the colonial, let's just go right after the colonial people, you know, the people who think they can invade and kill people, and they can get away with that shit, because those guys are insufferable weirdos, just generally, and then on also the media they like to produce. Looking at you, they know who they are, absolute fuckwits. Also devastating because I was gonna go put this on and do like a Victorian media. I hate absolutely everything, but my fucking dappery is on point, and I don't get to do that because, and this is so important, I don't know where my top hat is. So that sucks.